Oh my goodness.
Okay, I think we're ready to begin more or less. I noticed a couple of groups today kind of wondering and seem to be pondering the questions a little bit more deeply maybe than usual. And so one of the things that I have learned about myself, one of the ways that I tend to work is once I've read it and once I've prepared it, I like trying to answer questions like this with what I know. Do most of you feel that way? You feel like you could take a good stab at the questions and try to find some answers? Do you enjoy it?
It's a challenge.
Okay. Good. I think that my suspicion is that for most of you it feels a bit more challenging than you're letting on. And you feel like my questions are harder than I give them credit for. No, they're not always easy for me. That's why I write them. Part of it is that, so when you talk about education, when you talk about high school and stuff, you get more obvious questions. Like there's a question, there's a direct answer to it, right? Like you get a question, you look it up in the book, and you have your answer. You don't actually learn very much by that. That's rote memorization or recall. And what we are aiming for in our study as much as we can is to begin to think about the scriptures. Not to memorize and recall, not to say, oh, it's in the book and I need my book to have the answer, but to begin to understand it from the inside out. To understand how the pieces fit together and what likely puzzle pieces are, even if you don't grasp them perfectly right away. So the way that I usually try to write the questions is that you can't just look up an answer. That you have to look up an answer and then you have to think about what that says and what it means, and then you're moving in the right direction. But you see, part of it is because of this training that I think we need to do, and this is something in our whole society, and it's something I need as well, is that we've lost, in a sense, the art or the ability to think about things. And the meaning of the scriptures really doesn't seem to open up until we start to think about them, until we start to ponder and open our hearts and encounter the God who's behind it, and listen to Him and listen to His voice and try and think of how we put the pieces together and to try it and see if it works. So there is a purpose in them being a little bit challenging. And sometimes if they're too much, you have to let me know, because the other thing is I'm just writing them. I'm sort of like, well, you know, I don't really know where the football field is and I don't really know where you guys are, so I just kind of make it up. And I do try and put in a few easy ones once in a while so that you don't feel too awful. But if you find them to be really hard, what I would encourage you to do is to go back after Bible study and see if answers are more clear. To go back and look at them, and sometimes I wish I would spend more time answering my questions than going through the text, because I think my questions are good. Because, like, when you write questions and when you've done it, it's a chance for me to tease out deeper meanings and point you in the right direction. And I tried to give prompts in that way. And I've also started, I don't know if you've noticed this, but now my questions have a standard form. Each question comes from one section. They all match. Like, it just goes straight down the thing. And I start a new line, or it goes all the way back to the beginning for a new bar for questions when it's a new section. So just to review briefly, we're beginning chapter 14, and this plot to kill Jesus is sort of occupying more and more of the space, the mental space, the capacity in the chapter. We're into the Passion narrative, the beginning of the Passion narrative, and this occupies by far the largest section in the Gospel of Mark. Jesus is going to celebrate the Passover in Jerusalem, and this really brings out the theme of the new Exodus. And again, it's trying to prompt that question in the listener or in the reader: what is the Exodus that Jesus accomplishes? What is he trying to do? Hopefully, can anyone answer that? What is Jesus trying to do? To establish the new covenant, that's a part of it, yep. What else? What was the first Exodus? Out of Egypt to the promised land. There we go. So the true purpose of Jesus, the true purpose of his Exodus, is not about Egypt, it's about sin. It's about salvation from sin. And that's kind of a monumental shift for the Jewish mind, not because the first Exodus wasn't about sin, but in the first Exodus, what is the strongest idea that's connected in the Jewish mind? Egypt. They're leaving Egypt, and it's Egypt, 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 and Jesus' answer is no, it's got nothing to do with Egypt. I went and lived there. It's kind of a nice place. It's a little hot, but whatever. Right? That Egypt wasn't the problem, sin was the problem. So that huge portion of the scriptures in these chapters is getting reframed. There's a new meaning that's being read into these old events. That's one of those important pieces to remember. You hear it in the liturgy as well when we're around Easter, that it starts talking about the new exodus from sin. It starts talking about some of those kind of themes that Jesus is going to accomplish in Jerusalem. So it's the Feast of Passover, the greatest feast in the calendar. This is connected with Exodus and the Feast of Unleavened Bread and manna in the desert, where God entered into a covenant with his people that is sealed in the blood of a lamb on their doorposts and is sealed in the blood of, I think, a bull when they're at Mount Sinai. And the chief priests are trying to put Jesus to death by treachery. They're going about this in a sneaky way. Why do you think they're doing that? They don't want to upset the people. Yeah, during the Passover. So there's on one level this movement of the people and Passover, and they're thinking about that. But there's something deeper happening here too. When you've done something wrong, what do? We like to hide. Here, they're doing something wrong, and so what's their reaction? They're trying to hide. It's all sneaky. It's behind the scenes. It's whispered in corridors. It's in the background. It's not going to burst into the open until the very end. Lots of you as parents have learned over the years, and again, this is a good principle to apply to Scripture and to life, that when your kids are whispering about things they don't want you to hear about, it's usually important. And the less they want you to hear about them, and the more quick they are to say it's nothing, the more suspicious you should be, right? And you know that if your suspicions are like that, the only thing that you can do, no matter what they say, is to get eyeballs on them. Because you should know that bad things like to hide. And so, if you get suspicious like that, it doesn't matter what they tell you. You should be saying to yourself, I need eyeballs. What are they actually doing? Because they might tell you the truth, and they might not. I mean, you have to remember and keep in your mind that we live in a fallen world, and human nature, despite how righteous you think your grandchildren are, or your kids, they're not that good. Because all of us do this. My suspicion is that you have all kinds of things, even in your daily life, that you wonder if you should tell your spouse. Right? Like things like, oh, I did that. No, I'm just not going to tell anyone. Not going to think about it. Just put it over in the closet. It's not even there. Right? And it might not even be about something bad. You know, I think there would be fewer problems in some places if parents were a bit more suspicious than not, because if you know, it's sad, but it's like you can't believe what kids tell you, and the best indicator that this is true is to watch body language. Because if you walk up to a kid, what are you doing, and they say nothing, and they won't look at you in the eyes, it's like, No, there's lots of reasons that it could be, and they're not all bad. I remember reading a story online about these parents that were getting panicky about one of their kids. It was a Catholic family, and the son had like started doing all these weird things, and he was sneaking out at night, and on, and he seemed to be staying up late and was tired, and mom and dad are panicked. So eventually, I forget who did it, but one day one of them like stayed up and decided to watch him or follow him, and guess what the answer was? Nope. The kid had decided to write a book and was trying to act out scenes from the book and figure out the logistics of how they worked. They were scared like drugs, wicked friends, criminal stuff, addictions and cell phones and the internet and all kinds of craziness. And it was actually because the kid was trying to write a book. But their suspicious mother fulfilled her purpose and, discovered and was able to open a door and introduce some things to her son and kind of applaud him for his diligence in making not bad choices, but also say, next time just ask us. Right? But like I said, you do have to be a bit suspicious in the modern world of people and places, because so many things happen like the chief priests in this story. And one of the saddest pieces of this is that there were all kinds of people around them who probably knew this was happening and could have confronted them and challenged them on what they were doing, and they did nothing. I mean, think about that. There's people on the Sanhedrin that could have stood up and said, this is wrong. To plot to kill someone is wrong. Pontius Pilate could have stopped it in its tracks. But human weakness, the lack of a desire to initiate conflict, all of that. You see how all of these pieces play into the story? And how, you've probably heard me say before, but there's a genius to the Christian understanding of the human person that I think is far better than any psychologist, any system, anything that comes about in the modern world. Nothing can hold a candle to the understanding of the human person that you find in the New Testament. This stuff works. It's the way we're made. It's like having a royal flush every time. Not because you know all the pieces, but because you can't have people without sin. You can't have like human nature without it being fallen. All of these pieces start working together, and all of a sudden it's like, whoa, wait a minute. Like, this story is about the chief priests and Jesus on one level, and on another level it's telling you the story of the human heart and how sin likes to hide. and how things like to be in darkness, and the importance of confronting darkness when you find it so that it doesn't get worse. Then we have a big contrast. So Jesus goes to Bethany, he gets anointed. We talked about the woman with the alabaster jar. This is something extremely expensive. She gives everything to Jesus, the best that she had, while the apostles are fighting about how much it's worth and whether it should be given to the poor, which isn't a bad thing. But again, there's kind of something about her love is extravagant, and Jesus praises that. We talked about the primacy of worship, that God remembers the small stuff. No sacrifice escapes his notice. Nothing is outside of his gaze. Every act of love is important to him. The connection with the poor widow. And again, I think if you think about this story, one of, I think, the most beautiful pieces of this is how does Jesus look at this woman? It's the kind of thing that I would encourage you not to just answer, don't just pick the obvious thing, but pray about that sometime. Imagine that. What does Jesus look like? How does he notice her? Do the other apostles notice her? Do they even watch until she breaks the jar of perfume? Because there's something about looking into the eyes of Jesus. When Jesus does this, it changes people's lives. When you think about these stories, like I've said again and again, and I think it's something we want to return to, is in a Bible study, we don't just want to study the Scriptures. We're ultimately trying to open the door to encounter a person. And so these kind of things are these little sort of windows into the life and the heart of Jesus that are good to jump through and gaze at. And it is important, I would say, we have to be extremely careful when you think you know the answer and when it comes to your mind like the snap of a fingers. Be careful about those, because God is bigger than we are, and there's more going on in his plan than we give him credit for. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes our preconceived notions and our assumptions can blind us to what's happening, can blind us to the encounter that God desires to have with us. You know, sometimes if you're praying and all of a sudden a memory comes up in your mind, maybe it's from years ago, maybe it was a good thing, maybe it was a bad thing, maybe it was difficult. In that time, it's usually not good to say, oh, I remember exactly what this was, and, you know, I remember this, and, oh, this is a distraction, and push it away. Sometimes that's true, and, you know, it takes a while to get a sense of it. But it's often better to say, Lord, did you bring this up? What's going on? Why did this come to mind now? Is there something in it for me here and now? Because in a lot of cases, there is. And in some cases, it's like, nope, I just thought of it. Okay, you know, some of us are, well, I can say this about myself at least, that I have lots of ideas all the time. I've learned to be very conscious of not following them all because I would never get anywhere. They occur to me very quickly, and I don't have to struggle to find them. That's not the same for everyone. Like, usually when I'm preparing a homily, I have too many things I want to talk about, not too few. And I have to try and sort out which one thing I'm going to hit when I want to do it. Some people struggle to find one, right? But preparing a homily is a perfect example. You know, sometimes it's really, really bad to go into it and read a story and say, I know what this says. I know what this means. I know what Jesus is doing. And it's like, oh, you do? Really? You know the mind of God about this. Mm-hmm. Maybe there's more in it than you think. Right? what you'll find the more you study the scriptures is that the more you get out of them. So I would encourage you to be careful of that instinct that starts to say, like, I can define this and put it in a box and I know what it means. Because sometimes, you know, there's extraordinary things that happen if you let them. Sometimes it starts with one thing and pretty soon it connected in a way that you had never imagined before, and all of a sudden the story crystallizes with an entirely different meaning. For instance, this happened to me in the feeding of the 5,000. I was praying about it. I think it's one of them in John, right? I have a new favorite character in the story because I was praying about it one day and this blew me away. The kid that gave up his 5 fish and his 2 loaves. He probably gave all he had. He probably didn't have food to feed his family. Maybe he was fishing all day, right? When you think about that character and reorient the scene around him, you have these disciples who are arguing, and Jesus looks at this kid, and it's like, will you give everything that you have? Are you ready to do that? And all of a sudden, the whole story blows up in a different direction than you would ever imagine, right? That's part of sort of coming to it with an open heart. I had no idea that that was going to happen when I prayed about that passage. I had no idea that that character was even in the story. And all of a sudden, this little line led me in a completely different direction than I was anticipating. Right? That's part of the fun of it when you start to listen. Anyway, enough of soapboxing. So Judas is plotting against Jesus. He betrays Jesus even though he's one of the 12. This happens after the anointing at Bethany. Maybe he had been moving in the wrong direction for a long time. Maybe he had been struggling. I don't know. I really wonder what the relationship of the other apostles was like with Judas. I really wonder how much they saw and how many times they wondered and how many times they asked Jesus. Because they're together at least for a significant period of time. I wonder if Judas was always going down the wrong path. Or if there was a time when he was moving in the right direction. I wonder what happened to him. But here, he begins to move in the direction of betraying Jesus, handing him over to the chief priests, who hand him over to the Romans, who hand him over to the Jews who crucify him. Jesus talks about his kingdom not being of this world. And again, this goes back to the concept of the Messiah. The Jews, most Jewish people, expected a Messiah who was going to save them from the Romans. They wanted their nation back. They wanted their worship back. And does Jesus save them from the Romans? No. Oddly, historically, the Romans killed them all, basically, and ruined their society. And it ends. But Jesus' kingdom is not of this world. And again, I think that's an idea that we have to work hard to appreciate, because lots of us want good things in this world. I find myself in the midst of this battle quite often in my current situation. And it's like, we're not made for here. This isn't it. It's a good place and it's a beautiful place and there's lots of beautiful things. But our homeland is in heaven. So is the kingdom of God, at least in its fullness. And again, Jesus calls us there. And that's not to leave this world behind. It's not to just treat it as if it doesn't matter, because it does, and it makes a difference. We're called to beautify it and sanctify it as we can. But ultimately, there comes a day when push comes to shove, and we have to let go of it, because we're not made for it and it's not good for us. So Jesus goes to prepare the Passover. He seems to have prearranged this. Maybe it was with the Essenes. We talked about the new Exodus, the real Exodus from sin, that he's instituting a new covenant meal. with the Eucharist, that he's inaugurating a new worship in the sacramental system of the church. Traditionally, there's two sacraments that we believe were celebrated at the Last Supper. Anyone know what they were? Holy orders. So this is the time when the apostles were ordained. And the Eucharist. Remember we talked last time a little bit about how rooms and spaces were smaller than we imagined them to be. We have to sort of reframe our brain because stuff in the ancient world was little. I always use the example of standing in a Roman palace. It was, I don't know, one of the palaces in the Roman Forum, and it was just the ruins of it, but I thought, man, this isn't too much bigger than my house. And then I thought that was really weird. And our concept of space must be dramatically different if my house, which is not a big house, was almost as big as a Roman palace. You know, because we imagine, you think of Disney movies and these palaces that are like 10,000 feet long and, you know, have thousands of rooms, and they weren't like that in the ancient world.
I have a question. So when you talk about the Last Supper, you know, there's different references. Do they have a feeling that they know for sure? Was it just the apostles, or were there other disciples?
Oh, how many people were at the Last Supper? That's Marlis's question. That's a good one. So here's an important place to be careful of. What do the scriptures tell us? Who's on the scene?
The apostles and
Jesus and the 12. Does it say anything about anyone else? So,
disciples, it uses the word disciple. And
it uses disciples in a couple of places. That could be a key. But here's one of these important things, and it's a logical it's a concept of logic. But this will also save you from all kinds of problems in the scriptures. So if our evidence says that it talks about Jesus and his apostles and maybe a few other disciples, what can we conclude? I will give you a hint. You cannot conclude from that no one else was present. That is a bad conclusion, because it says nothing about anyone else at all. All you can conclude, essentially, is that these people were there. It's very possible that there were others. Now, there's reason to suspect that Jesus and his apostles probably ate alone, and that even Mary and Mary Magdalene and some of the others may have also eaten a Passover meal at the same time in another place. There's theological reasons why that would make sense, but we have to be careful with what evidence we have, because all kinds of people will read stories like this and draw the completely wrong conclusions from it. And it's because they committed violations of logic. How many healings does Jesus do in this week in Jerusalem? You don't know. We have no idea. That's worth saying. We have no idea. We don't know. We don't know how many healings he did on a day. We have no idea. There's indications that it's a lot more than are recorded in the scriptures. They tell us that a lot. But do you see how some of this precision is so important? Because it will save you from logistical nightmares later. It's perfectly fine to admit we don't know. We have evidence that Jesus healed these people, maybe that he healed 3 people in the same day. How many lepers did Jesus heal? There's only a couple stories of it in the Gospels. Does that mean he only healed 2 lepers or 3 lepers or whatever it is, if you counted them all out? And the answer is no. We have no idea. He might have healed like 6,000 of them. You know, there's all kinds of things. Again, the principle is that the life of Jesus is bigger than what's recorded in the Gospels. There's a bigger context that the Gospels are situated in, and the Gospels are written for a reason. They're written to prepare us to encounter Christ, the living God. That's their whole purpose. The entire narrative is to bring you to an encounter with Jesus, not to describe the life of Jesus at depth. If you don't believe me, what was his favorite food? I could tell you that it was chocolate chip cookies, and you can't tell me I'm wrong. Because it's literally not mentioned at all, anywhere, ever. He only eats breakfast, as nearly as I can tell, once. And it's with fish that he created out of nothing. So, precision is important. And it's really, really, really important to try not to overplay your hand. If you don't know something, it's much better to say, we don't know, this is a guess, we think it's possible that, instead of saying that this is absolutely the way it is. For instance, last time's prophecies, is this not a mess of people who overplay their hand all the time? They look at passages, they look at verses, they try to think that it talks about the future, and then they start sorting out, and pretty soon they end up in the same place practically every single time, completely wrong and entirely off base. Whereas if you're ready to say, well, we don't actually know. I mean, wouldn't it be funny to discover going to heaven that Jesus ate the Last Supper twice? It's like, well, which one is the last one? Well, I don't know. Right? I mean, there might be all kinds of things that we just have no idea about. I mean, maybe he ate the Last Supper with 300 people. He could have. Unlikely, because you'd have to get a building big enough to have 300 people in it and figure out how to make food for 300 people. And there's, you can apply some reasoning to this. But do you see what I mean? Like, there's all kinds of things that we could be completely surprised about.
Isn't the key word focus?
What do you mean?
Focusing on God himself, what this is about, instead of surrounding things.
Yeah, that's a part of it.
Sometimes I'm praying and my memory goes crazy and I have to focus.
Yeah.
And I think that's a key in all these scriptures is focus.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's true. Do you have a question too?
I'm thinking how we wanted to spread the word as humans.
Mm-hmm.
So if we only did things once or twice, it would take that much longer for everybody to hear. Whereas nowadays, you got, technology to spread the word.
Yeah. What's really amazing is that it doesn't seem to have helped us very much.
No.
Like,
Wrong things get spread.
well, but not just that. I mean, because you could even take healings or miracles that have been recorded and in technology, right? And what almost universally happens is people wonder whether it's real or whether it really happened. But yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of pieces with this. And my whole point is just to kind of point out that the life of Jesus is bigger and broader than what we know about it. And that's one of the reasons why I think we can pray. Not because every prayer that we have is going to be, biblical truth. It's not. If you're praying one day and you imagine Jesus sitting next to you on a log, or Jesus sitting on a log next to his disciples near a river fishing, does that mean they did it? No. It might be a perfectly valid prayer. There might be a ton of things in it for you. But just because you imagine it or are praying about it doesn't mean that it happened. So it works in one direction, like from the scriptures and the life of Jesus to us, but doesn't work in the other direction to say, well, from our experience and our prayer, it becomes gospel truth. And again, if you remember that, it will save you from all kinds of nightmarish problems. There's all kinds of people in the modern world who publish books that say, Jesus told me. Jesus said this, Jesus said that. Are those books bad? No. I think they can encourage your faith, and some of them are probably true. But they're not true in the way that it was true about the scriptures. They're of a different sort of thing, and it doesn't work back the other direction. So Jesus prophesies about his betrayal. We talked about reclining. Has anyone tried reclining at a table? Oh, come on. You gotta try this once. Try eating a meal like on your living room floor, like reclining sideways. You have to, because it's like, it will give you a picture of what this was like. I think it's awkward. I can't imagine how people ate that way, but it's the actual story they did. It's good. I don't know if most of you are here one day, but it's good to wonder about those kind of things and to explore and investigate, because that too can help the scriptures come alive. Like if you've never been to a Passover Seder meal, I would encourage you to watch it or participate in one sometime to see what it's like and what it feels like, because it's different and it's a different sort of thing. And it's a bit unexpected. And that's not to say that everything in a modern Jewish ritual is exactly what Jesus did. There's all kinds of evidence that it isn't. But again, it will give you a better impression of a Passover supper with Jesus and what it was like. Those are important human pieces to learning. So the institution of the Eucharist. Oh, the one other piece about this section, each of the disciples says, "Surely it is not I, Lord." Remember that they all are convinced or knowledgeable about their ability to betray him. That kind of humility is good. The institution of the Eucharist. There's these 4 words that we hear at Mass, and they happen in this order. And it's kind of a key in the scriptures because it's probably where the Mass got it from. Jesus took bread, he blessed it, he broke it, and he gave it. He took, he blessed, he broke, he gave. It shows up in the feeding of the 5,000, and it shows up here at the Last Supper. And it shows up in other places too. And so again, this is a little thing that you should keep in your mind. If you hear these 4 things in a row, you should think of Mass and the Eucharist. He took, he blessed, he broke, he gave. So it was during a Passover meal. There's a ceremony to it, like there's a ritual order that you eat things in, and you tell the story of the Exodus, about how God did mighty deeds for us to save us from Egypt, to save us from this realm of sin and slavery. This was usually explained by the father of the house, by the patriarch. The history of the Exodus in Egypt. There's unleavened bread at the meal. The modern day Jews call it matzo. You find matzo in a grocery store. You can actually use that for the Eucharist. It's kind of like a dry cracker, but it's made the same way with flour and water, and you have to have it for Passover. I've always wanted to make it, the traditional way to make it is you like roll it out very, very thin, and you throw it on a very hot fire, on the coals in the fire. And like it kind of burns and gets crispy, and then you flip it over very quickly and it burns and it gets crispy and you take it off. So it'd be a little bit more like pizza crust. I've wanted to try that. I haven't yet. And Jesus gives himself to his disciples. He says, "Take and eat." Now, if you were a disciple there, this is where all of a sudden the meal just got weird, right? You're going along like normal. This is Passover. Jesus is probably explaining and talking about Passover like he's supposed to. And all of a sudden you get to the part with the unleavened bread, and he takes it and says, "This is my body, now eat it." Like, you know, most of us would say, Jesus, we don't eat people. Right? Like all of a sudden it's like the song is going along and you hit a completely different note that you weren't expecting. And it's like, wait a minute, what's that? what did you just do? Right? Maybe they knew more about it coming along, but it's a surprising note in the story, because if you're reading Passover meal, you should expect Passover meal. That's obvious, right? And all of a sudden you get to the bread and it's no longer Passover meal. It's like Jesus just did something strange. That kind of contrast, that kind of insight is key, because this is probably a moment when things start to change. When it becomes much more clear that Jesus isn't just celebrating a Passover, he's celebrating his Passover. That now all of a sudden the lamb that was at the center of the old meal has disappeared from the story. Did they eat it? We don't know. But it's replaced by Jesus, the Lamb of God, who is moving in a very different, very new, dramatically different direction. He talks about wanting to eat this Passover with them, that he has greatly desired it. He talks about giving them the cup of the blood of the covenant. Now, this is one of those images that combines all kinds of things. You were saved by the blood of the lamb on your doorposts from Egypt. Wine is a sign of joy and festivity and abundance. It's a gift. Blood is the source of life. You know that Jesus feeds us with his blood. Blood was a source of life. In the Old Covenant, you couldn't eat things with blood in them because life was sacred and belonged to God alone. So Jewish kosher rituals around the killing of animals and meat involve draining the blood out of the animal, because blood is sacred and belongs to God. And all of a sudden, you have Jesus, the Son of God, saying, "Take and drink, this is the chalice of my blood." Again, that's a completely different note. It's like a key change in a symphony. This is very different. He talks about being saved from sin. This will be poured out for you and for many, so that sins may be forgiven. This is the new covenant in my blood. Again, Jesus has placed himself at the center of this in a way that no one has ever done before. This is the moment, in a sense, that the prophets have anticipated, because here at the Last Supper, Jesus gives himself. This isn't like any other gift that God gives. This is kind of the fullness of the meaning of God as Emmanuel, as God with us. That it's not good for man to be alone. Do you remember the line from the Garden of Eden? That there's this sin problem in the human heart, that things are broken. And so God's solution is not distance. God's solution is, I will come myself. That I will change you from the inside out. I will become your food, that your body will change into part of you, so that you become part of me. It's also something that is spoken of in the Old Testament, that the day of the wrath of God, the chalice of his overflowing wrath, right? The day of the Lord, the great and terrible day, when the sun will be darkened and the stars will be shaken and they will fall to earth. Like, if you see, this passage is weaving in a tremendous number of ideas from the Scriptures. And this is another important thing to think about, the day of the wrath of God. When is that? What is God's judgment on human sin?
He sends the sun to take the place.
He sends his Son, and what does Jesus say on the cross? Father, forgive them. The judgment of God, the justice of God, find its fulfillment and its greatness in forgiveness. Again, there are profound things to think about in how these scenes are linked together, because the language that is used here in the Last Supper is the same language that is used on the cross. The way that the text works, and if you think about this in the liturgy, is that when we celebrate the Mass of the Lord's Supper on Holy Thursday, the very next day is kind of part of the same liturgy. There's no conclusion to Holy Thursday, and there's no beginning to Good Friday. The priest just walks in and doesn't say anything. There's no new sign of the cross. Because it's like God has taken these different moments in time and united them all together. What Jesus is doing here at the Last Supper in giving himself to his apostles is a sign and a prefigurement, but also the reality of what he will do on the cross and in his passion. They're part of the same event. They're the same thing. It's the same sacrifice. We talk about the Mass and the sacrifice of the Mass representing the sacrifice of Jesus on Calvary. That even in our language, we've linked the two moments together. The Paschal Mystery, the Paschal Triduum, also links another one, the resurrection and Holy Saturday, and sort of Ascension. That all of these moments are part of this same movement, the same act of redemption, and we're meant to see them together. Sort of like two sides of the same coin, to dig into it, to look at it together. Because the events in the life of Jesus are not separate from each other. He's the same person. The same one who died rises. The same one who gave himself at the Last Supper dies on the cross for us. That it's united by a person. And so, again, the language here is just of a kind of richness that we rarely grasp and we rarely think about, where all of these different pieces and these different strands from the history of Israel and priesthood and sacrifice and offering and the temple and sin and Satan and the human heart, it all comes together in these moments in the life of Jesus. And he says about the chalice, I will not drink this until I drink it again with you in the kingdom of God. Already there's a hint that something is coming, that this guy isn't going to die forever. He's not going to be dead because he plans on drinking wine again in the kingdom of God. Which is why all the people who talk about there being beer in heaven are completely wrong. Jesus says nothing about drinking beer. What?
You didn't say there's not beer.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. But he does say that wine will be. And he has not mentioned that he's bringing beer either. That can cut both ways. But my hope, I think the Last Suppers we're spending some time with, because you see how the events really do come together, how this language that Jesus is using comes together and can give us a much greater sense of the impact and the import of this moment. And it's worth unpacking. It's worth sitting with and looking at these strands and thinking about and figuring out, because there is a lot to it. and there's a lot in it for us. Let us pray. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen.